and it was great. I mean, there was just every second of the way making that show, we thought that it was going to get canceled. You know, that network had kind of gone through a lot of just transitioning. There was like a lot of like merged acquisitions that were happening throughout that whole period of making Scavengers, and shows were getting cut left and right. So I was kind of like, oh boy, we're doomed. I mean, there's no way this thing's gonna make it. I was initially kind of thinking like a much more just a fast approach to making this thing, because we had a tiny budget and all this stuff. And Charles did a couple style frames of just like the look for the short, and I was like, oh, well, this is. And I think it was like kind of a new direction for him, and had a little bit of that kind of like Mobius influence and all that stuff, and I was like, okay, we're gonna we got to do this. Um, and it definitely like even I'd say it like evolved even more going into the series. It was pretty wild. The characters became sort of like less cartoony, and uh, so we just tried to adapt to that.
Yeah, I remember. So I'm gonna linger on that or come back to that in a
Yeah.
second. I just remember what I wanted to say. I remember, I think the very first animation I've seen from you was the Pepe frog,
Oh
like
yeah.
touching the stone. And
Yeah.
it started going like really viral, like this kind of style of animation, like this
Yeah.
animation specifically. And there were a few others that I saw.
Yeah.
But I remember that one, and it was because obviously like the crypto movement and the crypto
Yeah.
movement adopted like the Pepe the Frog and started
Yeah.
like blowing it up, and I saw it on Twitter, and I think that's the first time I stumbled upon your work, like knowing who you actually are versus like seeing the short as like, ah, that's super cool, and then like almost forgetting about it. You know how it
Yeah.
is, like you watch a short, it's like, wow, that was cool. And then like something else distracts you and whatever.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
so I'm assuming you just have like animation background, right? Like that's where you're coming from, or how did you like what happened before, like in between you getting born to you creating the Scavengers and then Scavengers
Yeah.
Reign?
I mean, I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York, and I went for fine arts. I wanted to be a painter, so that was kind of my main focus. And um, about junior year, they opened up a digital labs on the west side, and I think just because it's fine arts and just a bunch of painters, nobody really wanted to like do anything with computers, so it was just this big digital lab that was just completely empty. And so just started spending a lot of time in there. There was the full sort of Adobe suite and Final Cut and all that stuff. And I just started teaching myself just very, very basic, just teaching myself animation through Flash and Animate. This was Flash at the time. And I was getting more excited about it. The idea of like being able to tell a story, and that was my means of doing it. It wasn't the prettiest animation, that's for sure, but it was just I was like, oh, it's amazing that there's a tool here that can allow me to kind of create this narrative, and I don't need to hire a huge crew to do it or anything like that. It was a very kind of DIY approach, and I just got obsessed with that kind of idea of just doing that more and more. Really into and like any new kind of tool or trick that I was pulling, it'd be like I'd do a freelance job at a post house, and then I'd learn something about kind of focal blurs, and so then I would run back and kind of apply that to a short that I'm working on. And so it was like that became an obsession that I just continued to do and make these shorts while I was working in um, post production for TV. I was working in advertising. It was kind of all over the place, and then eventually, it's in my maybe 23 or 24. I had made a few shorts, and I was doing a series called Odin's Afterbirth, and that was someone from MTV through a friend just reached out and said, "Hey, we'd love to. We're going to do the version 2.0 of Liquid Television, and wanted to see if you'd be interested in being a part of that, and we could just commission you to make the next, um, you know, chapter of Odin's Afterbirth." And so this was part 3 that they were commissioning, and I was able to hire a team. It was the first time ever that I was able to kind of like hire a crew, and this was where mentally I was starting to kind of get into, reaching out to animators that I really liked, people that I knew online.
Right.
There was this whole community. I don't know if you remember like the Vimeo days
Oh yeah.
and live and just that whole thing. And so it was fun. It was a very, and obviously we're talking like a small budget. I think it was, I had like 25 grand or something to kind of make this thing out of, but I just really went nuts with it. And I think that was kind of the moment where I was like, this is what I want to do, and I want to quit advertising. And so I left, and I focused on this. And I think there was a period, of long period actually, where I was not really making any money. I was making shorts, maybe kind of questioning things a little bit here and there,
Right.
just like, what am I doing? But but then, in every year there would be kind of like a new little thing. I started doing bumpers for Adult Swim, and that was just me kind of like slowly crawling up, up, and the bumpers kind of then became like, okay, do you want to do a short with us? And so eventually it became the Scavenger short. Then I started doing shorts for FX, um, and yeah, so after the Scavengers bit, I was also developing a show called Common Side Effects, which is the show that I'm wrapping up right now,
Hmm.
and that's for Matt. That's for Adult Swim, um, and yeah. So we let's see, we made the short. Then Adult Swim kind of liked that and wanted to do a pilot. So then we made the pilot, and then they were kind of like, I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. And so then a couple years went by, and then it got picked up by HBO Max. It was HBO Max at the time, and it was great. I mean, there was just every second of the way making that show, we thought that it was going to get canceled. That network had kind of gone through a lot of just transitioning. There was a lot of like merged acquisitions that were happening throughout that whole period of making Scavengers, and shows were getting cut left and right. So I was kind of like, oh boy, we're doomed. I mean, there's no way this thing's going to make it. And I'm very surprised that it did, but we were
I'm
very
glad it
fortunate.
did.
Yeah, yeah,
Definitely glad.
and I gotta say, we worked with these execs, Billy Wee and Aaron Davidson. They were the execs at the time, and I was very fortunate to have those two shepherding this project, because it's just a blast to work with, and really uh, were very supportive about these kind of decisions, even if they didn't feel very conventional. I think we were really like, let's try to make something here that, I don't know, is as natural and subtle as possible, and let's, I don't know, just try to, even if it's kind of fitting within sort of a sci-fi genre, like let's just try to do something as different as we can. So I'm surprised that it eventually saw the light of day, but I'm very very happy
I'm extremely happy. I mean, I
with
watched it. I finished. It's funny because I started watching it, and then my business partner reached out. Is like, "Hey, have you seen Scavengers, Rain?" I'm like,
Yeah.
I just started watching it, and then Ash reaches out, dude, you gotta watch Scavengers Race. Like, all right, I just started.
Yeah.
Give me time to catch up. And I like to binge stuff, but this was the show that I didn't want to binge. I wanted to like
Oh,
watch every episode and kind of like soak it in.
yeah.
Um, and the main reason is because I mean, I remember I grew up when I was growing up. I grew up on like VHS tapes in the 80s and like movies from the 80s and 90s, and then anime that came out. I've been a huge fan of like a very classic kind of old school 90s 80s anime, like Ghost in the Shell,
Mm,
Kawajiri's animations, like Vampire Hunter, and
mm,
Wicked City, all those kind of like super, like you look at those are like the super classics, right? And
yeah.
I and I've just been reflecting recently, and I have this conversation with a lot of friends that there's kind of this kind of dead rot in cinema, generally speaking. Like it's almost like you're watching sequel upon sequel of the same stuff or adaptation
Yeah.
of the same stuff, and then
Yeah.
whenever something fresh comes out, like I'm really like, it's better be good. Like we need more good stuff that comes out and is like really
Yeah.
great, um and it sticks, and is and Scavengers definitely was that. I was surprised
Yeah.
how different that show was from everything else I've watched last year, or even just in last
Mm,
few years, right?
mhm,
And I
mhm.
remember obviously the the short you've guys done. I rewatched the short recently too, just to kind of refresh myself to compare the two, you know,
Mm.
and like it was such a big contrast story, like just construction wise, not
Oh,
just the
sure.
story
Yeah.
obviously was a different
Sure.
thing, but
Yeah.
construction wise it almost felt like, man, I'm watching like this kind of like Leonardo da Vinci constructions with nature. Right?
Yeah.
That's
That's
basically
amazing.
what the short felt like. It's like, oh, like
Yeah.
they're doing something to trigger something else, and that
Yeah.
triggers something. It's sort of like this domino effect. Like, what was the inspiration for that?
I mean, it was a lot of stuff was influenced by like Rube Goldberg machines and thinking
Okay.
about like kind of cause and effect and like the process of something. Um, I think that was a big part of it. This was we made the short prior to that YouTube channel, Primitive Technology coming out. But when it did come out, I was like, that's also a big part of it. Seeing kind
Right.
of every step of the process of something being made was like a really wonderful thing. And the idea of kind of creating this totally made up nature that has its own symbiotic relationships and its own ecosystems that are all kind of interconnected. And then these characters finding sort of their functionality out of each thing. I think that was a big part of it, and especially the idea of like uh, I was watching a lot of videos of people, these guys in India that were like constructing these boxes, like for like shipping boxes, that sort of thing, like as fast as they could, and it was just like super fast. And I was like, there's something so satisfying about that. Someone that's just gotten so used to a thing on like an assembly line, they figured that out. So thinking about these characters kind of in that space in this nature, where it's like they've clearly been here for a while. They clearly understand this, and they're kind of using it to their um, for their needs. There's a sort of a utility to it. I think that was kind of where a lot of it was pulling from. But yeah, I mean, I was saying this to Ash, like a lot of it was just sort of like looking at these kind of Rube Goldberg machines and thinking about that, thinking about it in terms of that, especially with the short, where it's like all of the dialogue. I mean, there's no dialogue, and all of the storytelling is a narrative is just visual. I think
Right.
it's an 8 minute long short, but I think it's kind of really testing the audience's patience. By the end of it, you're like, I don't know if this is like, what is the payoff for this kind of a thing? I think that was, and so I think it was a challenge to sort of extract that into a full blown series. I think at first I wanted to do a version where there is no dialogue on the whole series, and it was just that basically. But I think that the network, that was the kind of main pushback, was just like, no, we need like more traditional story arcs and characters and that sort of thing. And in hindsight, I'm actually glad that that was the direction we went in. I feel like I would have pigeonholed us or something if we had those kind of limitations. So
It's interesting because I had a brief conversation with Alberto Mielgo, and he hates
yeah.
dialogue too. Like he would
Oh
like when
man,
you watch his films, like there's just really no dialogue either.
I
Um,
it's funny that you say that. I can totally see, at least with Miego, like the naturalism. Like he's a
yeah,
fan of that kind of like naturalistic kind of. I think that like I hate stuff that feels rehearsed and scripted. I think
right.
that's it just doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel real. Um, so I totally get it. It's not that I hate people talking. It's just that like you want to really kind of, we were pulling references too from things that I was creating like sizzles and all that stuff for the storyboard artists, and Charles and I were kind of like giving them reference material to kind of go off of and think of things thematically, and also just kind of like the sort of philosophy of the show or whatever. But also just like, if you're thinking about a fight that happens in this, well, think about Leo DiCaprio getting mauled by a bear in The Revenant.
Right.
That's your North Star, not some cool, you know, I don't know, Justice League fight or something. Something
Justice
that
League
just feels a
fight.
little bit more real.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing against Justice League. I'm just, that's
Yeah, it's one feels more, hey, here it is what it is, and
yeah,
take it or leave it, versus, hey, let's make this popcorn induced
right.
um, action sequence
Yes.
for the sake of making it cool, rather
Yeah,
than
exactly.
like, yeah, that's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
have you ever played this game, Another World? I'm not sure if it was called like that in US. It was more of a European name. I think it had like a like different name. It was a Amiga game from the 80s. If you
No,
haven't,
I haven't.
if you haven't,
I'll
I
look it
bring
up.
it up because it's like a lot of my friends who watched Scavengers, right? It's like, yeah, there's like the Mobius, and it's mostly because of like the stylistic kind of, not similarities, but
Yeah.
you could place the two all together and like, yeah, I can see it. To me, Another
Yeah.
World is a better reference. And the main
Huh.
reason I'm mentioning this, and maybe there are playthroughs of the game.
Yeah.
Um, that was a groundbreaking game of the time because they've bypassed the limitations of the like the graphics computing by
Yeah.
making everything in like vectors. So all of the animation are basically calculated vectors, like the shadows and
Yeah.
highlights and everything. They just made vector art. So it was
Yeah.
more numbers and less of the graphics demand on
Very
on
cool.
on the whole thing, which was like
Yeah.
groundbreaking at the time. But the reason I'm mentioning it is one of my favorite games of all time, by the way,
Yeah.
like super old school.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a game in which the character was placed in like this alien world, and nothing was explained or exposed. You had to learn everything as you play, and like
Yeah.
the story evolves by you playing it. Like obviously there's a storyline and you have to follow. It's like a platform game, but
Yeah.
nothing was exposed to you. Like
Sure.
you're immersed into it, and you felt like you are this person in this alien world,
Yeah.
like this parallel universe that you were transported to, and you just
Yeah.
have to kind of accept it and live in it. And when I was
Sure.
watching Scavengers, it almost felt like there was no exposition for the nature. There was no exposition for what, like, there was no dialogue explaining why those characters behave one way or another,
Right. Right.
or like, oh, this creature is doing this. Like, none of that, right? Like, it
Yeah.
assumed that you're gonna figure that out.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you don't figure it out, that's okay too. I mean, I think that's a
right.
big part of it. It's just like I in the writers' room, I was kept bringing up this sort of analogy of, if we're walking, going on a hike together, um there's a good chance we'll talk about anything but the hike itself, you know? Like
Right.
we're not gonna talk about like the pathway that we're on and the trail that we're on. Or if we do, it would feel forced or something kind of weird about that. And I kind of feel like that's a lot of the times that's how that sort of like heavy exposition feels like, where it's just like you don't need to this kind of say thing where you don't need to explain what's going on when you can actually see it. And I think that was a big part of just like the you know internally we had names for a lot of these creatures and that sort of thing, but I think it was like that would have been a bad move if you had characters naming them and whatever. It just cheapens it all to me, and I like that it's this big sort of blanket of different kinds of creatures, and there are sort of connections and there are symbiotic relationships that exist, but you don't necessarily need to know about it. And if you're really paying attention, you could kind of follow it. But if not, it's like it's not a big deal. I think that was a nice balance to kind of try and keep throughout. But
Yeah. I like that the nature didn't give a fuck about anything in the
yeah,
film. It was just there.
merciless. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It almost felt like when you would see a new creature or plant or like whatever was happening, whether it was like a nature event, it felt like it could be dangerous, but it could also be magnificent, you know? Like there was
totally.
no like it almost felt like to me it felt like watching it almost always being at the edge of a seat,
Yeah,
kind of trying to
yeah,
figure out like what's gonna happen next. And not in the way of like jump scares or action sequences and whatnot, but just like this kind of uneasy kind of feel to the world that
yeah,
literally doesn't care about the characters. And that's again
yeah.
like why I'm bringing another world, because when you play that game, that's exactly the feeling you have all the time.
Right, right.
Like you don't know if it's beautiful, it is, but also
Or
it's dangerous and you
yeah.
don't know um
I
so that
mean
was
that was the yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I mean, I think a big inspiration point always was just kind of like the nature that exists here, on Earth. Like it's sort of the same thing, and the idea of these characters kind of suffering, going through their own sort of inner turmoil and pain, and it's against the sort of backdrop of this nature that is in a lot of ways, I'd say, like neutral, merciless. It's unforgiving. It can be beautiful, but it could be dangerous. And I think that kind of contrast throughout was always really nice, especially when you have a character like Cayman, for instance, who was in a very kind of mentally fragile state.
One of my
But
favorite characters, by the way.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Um, just very influenced by his surroundings and sort of kind of gave into that. And by episode 5, of course, was just totally just gave up and was like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, he seems like he is sort of a villain, but he isn't. He's like the most tragic character of them all, in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
I don't know spoilers, but if you haven't seen the whole
Yeah.
thing yet, shame on you. um,
He's a character that you like empathize with. I mean,
right.
he sucks, but you kind of I don't know, you sort of feel for him at the end. I mean, that was another thing too of just typical animation tropes, and like maybe if we're gonna have an antagonist, you're gonna have a villain. Maybe they're not totally a villain. Maybe this creature that pulls Cayman in, it's just a creature that does that's what it does, and it was just kind of a weird crossfire with these two characters and unfortunate circumstances, but like Cayman was in a fragile state, and Hollow was just doing what it does. I think it was just kind of like looking at it in terms of that, and just trying to avoid certain tropes. Like, why does it have to be this kind of villainous thing that's just always, I don't know, has no other sort of it's one dimensional and has no other mission than to just cause pain on people. That doesn't I don't, didn't make a lot of sense
Yeah.
for what we were doing.
How closely did you work with writers on this? Like,
Yeah, very close. I mean, we had a writer's room in the beginning, um, before
And how
we.
did you obviously come up with who's like the best person to write this?
Um, uh, I guess reading scripts, you know, reading a lot of scripts, and um, every writer kind of had their own sort of forte that they brought to the table, and it was really nice. But uh, I I don't know of any. I think I could safely say that no writer was specifically a sci-fi writer, and which I think was beneficial. It's the same thing with the animators too. It's like we all were kind of came from a different, like our background. We're doing independent animation, and um, so it was a lot of sort of like unorthodox methods and approaches in making things. And I think the same thing with writing. It was just sort of um, pulled from, I guess, a little bit more random things than. And not to say that if we had like a Dune, someone that was a writer on Dune, that it would be a problem. I mean, I'm sure it'd be great, but I guess it just allowed for, like, we were like naive about certain things, almost to a like our benefit, like it almost was
Yeah.
helpful. It didn't stifle us in any way. We were just thinking about the story more than anything.
Yeah, because it felt when you watch it, it does, and I think comes back to the exposition thing again. Is that it feels very kind of like a true sci-fi in a way of not trying to explain things
Mhm.
scientifically or make a sense of it in terms of like, oh, what the world in the future would be like, or like what kind of genre it's supposed to be. um it almost like it pulls you back to the good old times where you know you would read sci-fi books from authors you wouldn't hear about unless someone tells you like you gotta read this book.
Mhm.
um I
Totally.
remember because I come from Poland. I was born in Poland, so one of the sci-fi writers over there is Stanisław Lem, who wrote Solaris. And
Oh yeah.
when you read Solaris, it's such a wild book to read.
Mhm.
I obviously watched the film. I think film like captures the essence of it. There's two films actually. There's the Tarkovsky, I think,
Right.
directed the original. Um, if I remember correctly, my memory is kind of like going away so very
Okay,
quickly.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But it's, I think, I mean, it might be a good reference too because it kind of relates to the idea. Well, in this case, it's the entire planet having an influence on the characters
Yeah.
and sending them hallucinations without any like agenda. Is just what the
Mhm.
planet does, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and it felt very like, yeah, they were on like a space station and whatnot. That's sort of like a very old school kind of sci-fi approach, but it never focused on that specifically, and it was more focused on the characters themselves and how they interact with this planet. And that was sort
Yeah.
of like the part of it that was, to me, like this kind of, you know this kind of very pure, you know no spaceships. Like, we're not making it about spaceships or guns,
Yeah. Right.
sci-fi cities and neons
Right.
and like
Right.
any of that stuff.
Right.
And
Yeah. Exactly.
it seems like the writing, I mean, to me the writing on the shows matters the most. And like
Yeah.
when I watch Scavengers, that was like probably one of the best written animated shows I've seen in a while. And I don't want to be like kissing ass here. It's just like, I'm a big, like, it's an amazing show. Like,
Oh man,
one
amazing.
of
Thank
one of
you.
the better ones I've seen in a while for sure. Certainly one of the most original ones, right?
Thank
But
you.
I'm always interested because like I like to write. I like to write my own stories too. I've
Yeah.
been directing, getting into directing for past year and a half, maybe two. Um, and it's like you quickly realize like how important writing is, because you can kind
Oh,
of
for sure.
cinematography and
Yeah.
compose shots to make them look cool, but if
Yeah.
the writing kind of sucks, then you know.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I would also say that, like, I think that, when we were doing the writing, a lot of the times it was like the description didn't always have the visuals that you saw on screen. It was more about kind of like following the characters and their arcs and that sort of thing. And so there was a lot of stuff that I was like, okay, well, the concept artists are kind of building the ecosystem here, and the writers' room was going on here. And with our production, there was a lot of transparency and a lot of overlap. So sometimes the concept designers would share, we would share what they're doing with the writers, and that would inspire some things. But it would be a lot of kind of like interweaving, an artist sort of uh, like the composer making music, and then that sort of spawned an idea. And I think it was just kind of like doing a lot of that sort of thing. Um, so a lot of the times, like a first pass on a script before anything almost wouldn't have a lot of those um, the organisms or a lot of the nature stuff that you see. It was like you painted that on later. So it depended on each episode. But I think for the characters, that was the top priority, was just kind of like, what is Ozzy's arc and Levi's arc? What are they doing, and where's that going? And then let's now add this next layer of like, what is their environment? What are their surroundings, and how does that affect them, basically? But yeah.
Who came up with the idea of killing Levi the way it was killed? Because that was
Well,
the first time I was like really fucking sad to see a bunch of metal pieces flying in the air. Like, what the fuck?
there was something, the idea of like in the episodes leading up to that, when Levi's talking about how she kind of like feels pain, and how they say that they're like feeling pain, and like they're kind of gaining sentience through the planet, and everything. I don't know. I I was really into the idea of Levi and Ozzy kind of bonding and kind of creating this relationship. And as much as we could, we tried to kind of pull Levi away from just feeling like a utility, like a utility bot, just that they have this other kind of this sentience is something that kind of a big part of it is what makes their relationship so much more special, because now they're like two people, two characters that really are bonding in a way. And I think that's kind of like doing a lot of that kind of groundwork to get to the point in episode 6 where it's like, oh well, when they die, it's sort of it really hurts. You feel it,
It did. Like, what the hell?
That's good.
Yeah, it was I f- I think it's because, and this is like my observation, is the show allows you to observe, and it leaves breadcrumbs.
Hmm.
And whether it's like breadcrumbs that will explain what will happen later, or will
Hmm.
relate to what happened later, or um, those that are basically building your relationship with characters, right?
Hmm.
So, like Levi dying in episodes, I think it was episode 6, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think it's made so much impact because you get to see him through episode 1 through 6, and you get enough interactions to care.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, I think the characters, just generally all the characters, felt like you really cared for them. Um, no matter how much screen time, like they were so well written, in my opinion, that you really knew, like you could really care.
Um,
Um, yeah, kudos for finding like picking the writers that for that show,
Thanks.
because like
I'll let them know that you. That's great.
because I know it's very hard to come across shows these days. Like I try to force myself to watch like a lot of shows, but there's only like very few that really hit the mark in terms of storytelling and how they are written, and then going beyond that, like how, how they look visually and all that. So um
Mm.
what was speaking of, like, lingering on that for a bit, we 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 were talking about the short and how it kind of transitioned over the years to
Yeah,
become the film. What was that period like? Because it was like a couple of years, right?
yeah,
Between
yeah.
the short.
2015 to 2000, yeah, I mean, till last year. Yeah, it was a lot of stop and go kind of a thing. Um,
Hurry up and
when we
wait.
made the, yeah, basically when we made the pilot, for instance, that was with Adult Swim. So it technically kind of went into HBO Max later on. It wasn't even, um, but and there was a lot of in between stuff. I mean, I think that there was like a shopping deal with one studio, and then it was like, okay, that's not going anywhere. I think ultimately, I mean, I guess making the pilot, I was like, I think this is going to see the light of day. I think this is going to become a show at some point. I just don't
Hmm.
know when, and I don't know with who. But uh, but it was a lot of stop and go. And honestly, in hindsight, I'm kind of like grateful. It allowed us to kind of stop and think about a lot of this stuff. And I remember when we were first making it, and when we were making the pilot, I remember being so concerned about uh, things that were coming out around that time that felt too similar, and I was like, oh, what's the point? What am I doing? It's just funny how much of that kind of like passed by, and I was like, oh, that's insane. And then I remember someone told me this, um, but apparently, like, no, I'm not comparing myself to David Lynch at all. But I just thought this was a funny thing. David Lynch was worried about. Apparently, he was making Eraserhead and had to stop for financial reasons, and was just um, had to kind of like put a pause on everything, and was freaking out that somebody else was going to make Eraserhead. Band just says it all. Like you do not have to worry. That is so like you, and no one's gonna make that. But I kind of feel similar with just Scavengers. Like I was worried about when Annihilation came out. I was terrified at first, but I don't know. It feels like it's a different enough thing. It's not.
Yeah, Annihilation was way different. Like
Yeah, yeah,
way different. Like
yeah,
you could argue concept wise, but then like everything kind of is a derivative of everything.
yeah.
Like,
Right. No, for sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because I just finished watching. I haven't watched it up until now, The Black Swan,
Oh yeah,
and I mean, I remember Perfect Blue pretty well, you know.
yeah. Totally.
And
I know, right, right, right. When I know it's crazy when I heard about that. That was insane. I didn't because it's like shot for shot, right?
in some cases, it's like,
Like
yeah, like legit shot for shot.
crazy,
Um,
so crazy.
but
Uh,
it's a different enough story. It's a different perspective.
Yeah,
Director's perspective is different too.
yeah,
Um, it's a slightly different setting, uh, but the
right.
clear inspiration.
Clear.
But honestly, like it's different, and you can make comparison, but it's different. Like I don't think it's worse or better. It's
Did
different enough.
rights to it, or was
I
it
have no
just that
idea.
he? Yeah, okay, okay.
I have no idea.
Uh,
But the interesting part to me was that it didn't take away from the original. Like it didn't make the original obsolete and vice versa,
mhm,
right? Like those
mhm.
two, even though they share some concepts, are two completely different things.
Right,
Um,
totally, totally.
yeah.
Everything that if you like look up the perfect blue like Wikipedia, it says that the budget was like 40 grand or something. It says it's something
I don't,
unbelievably
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I would be curious. I
low.
mean, who knows? Who knows? Uh, It's definitely not the Akira budget,
Yeah,
you know, but that was a special movie too. And I don't think Akira would have ever been made like, I don't think Akira would be the same thing if it was made like 5 years later, either,
sure. Yeah,
because of the climate and the you know, the economics
yeah,
of the country, all that kind of stuff.
totally.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I'm it's always like the timing that you would think that matters, and maybe it does, but you know, at the end of the day, I think, and at least when I watch something like Scavenger's Reign, it speaks to me. It's like, you know, there's a clear creator's intentions, you know, behind this, that are his and original to him. And then whether it becomes successful or not, it's like literally just a roll of the dice, right? Like, because
Yeah, totally.
who knows? Like, all you need is
Yeah,
like one TikTok account to pick it up, and then it becomes
yeah,
massive, right?
yeah,
Or it
totally.
doesn't. Like, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, even with the Pepe stuff, seeing how kind of quick that stuff blew up, it's pretty wild to see, especially on TikTok and all that.
Yeah, that Peppa stuff is so good, dude. It's so good. And I've watched like all the other little animations you've been making. You're posting those regularly on Instagram. It's
Yeah.
just so fun. I was talking to my good friend. He was a VFX art director at Blizzard. He did like the StarCraft cinematics and like the original StarCraft like the StarCraft 2 cinematics and World of Warcraft cinematics. He was like, you know, and he just sent me the one you did with the bird.
Oh, yeah. That was like originally that was for like that was an Adult Swim bumper. That was like
Oh,
one of the
okay.
first kind of commissioned little shorts
It's
that was
so
like gonna be.
dark, dude. It's so dark. Like,
It's pretty
holy
dark,
shit.
yeah. But yeah,
Um, yeah, where do you take inspiration for all that stuff? Because it's like there is a very specific kind of taste you have, right?
sure.
Like, it
Yeah,
comes across all of your work. It's very unorthodox, but sometimes like tongue in cheek, you know,
yeah,
and sometimes like really serious, right?
yeah. I don't have a good answer. I don't know. I could tell you that I like to people watch and I like to just sort of observe. I don't know. I mean, if it's just um I can kind of get pretty glued to like just seeing people's behavior and just how they act, and I think that sort of is probably where a lot of the inspiration comes from. But I don't have any kind of method or anything like that. It's just you know, at the end of a day, I'll just have a handful of things that I'll be thinking about that I experienced that day, and then I don't know, it'll just sort of come out
Do you write them down, like ideas that pop up in your head, or
sometimes, but I don't not
just kind of make it flow?
just gonna make it flow. Yeah. I did have a habit for a while of like, I'll like write stuff down and then I'll like kind of cut it out and I'll have a big pile of just random ideas and then I'll kind of like look through that later on and see where that comes from, but there's no real system or anything.
Just,
Yeah.
this is a good
Just
idea. Let's just
yeah,
fuck
just like
and
yeah.
just hands
I
dirty.
think a lot of it is just like fixating on a thing, just like constant. If it's
Right.
like this barista said a certain thing, and I can't stop thinking about the
Hmm.
way they said it, like how they said it, the mood that that they were in when they said it, like everything, and I'll just fixate on that. And then if at a certain point it's like thinking about this for a reason, I'm just gonna do something with it, and kind of either turn it. But it also depends. It's like I think with a lot of the comedy stuff, that's always kind of like there's that itch I want to scratch, and then there's the kind of more sincere stuff that is like Scavengers that I guess is maybe just more observational and like nature, whatever,
Right.
not so much people.
Yeah, it seems like from what I pick up, talking to you. It's like there's a lot of serendipity that's happening on the daily basis that you kind of learn to translate into
Yeah.
into moving pictures, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Um, and I think also just kind of like having certain limitations, like knowing like, okay, well, like this bumper has to be 30 seconds long. And
Right.
so what kind of a story can I actually even tell with that or whatever? I mean, I like those kind of challenges. I think that's kind of really fun. Um, and I think what stresses me out more than anything is having like just a ton of options. I like setting kind of parameters as quickly as possible, going in and kind of being like, well, I know what I'm not able to do. Um, and so a lot of it is like self-imposed deadlines and um, especially when you're working in TV and that sort of thing. It's
Right.
like it's already got its own challenges, and I think that creatively can be really helpful.
Yeah, I always wonder like how other creatives deal with the concept of perfectionism and not really like leaning into it too much.
Sure. Yeah. They're like it comes like a handicap.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
it can.
Um, I mean that the process and just kind of there's always a period where it's like this shot could be better, and but is it good enough? And I would also say that like I would not have been able to make that show without Charles, without the whole team. It was a lot of artists that did an unbelievable job and really kind of had their own were fixated on different things. I think that was a big part of it. Like
Yeah.
Benji Brook was the supervising director and he was phenomenal and he was fixated on certain things and just kind of making sure. But those were things that I didn't care so much about or Charles didn't care so much about. We all had our own kind of like things. Charles was kind of like overall picture, color, backgrounds. That was, he was really covering the art department. And I think Benji's like such a stickler with like hookups. So for instance, this is a weird example, but like a hookup shot and it's not
Right.
hooking up, so we got to figure that out. And for me, it's a lot of it's like pacing and editing and the music and the sound and all that stuff. So it was I'm very fortunate to have the team that I had on the show, and yeah,
Yeah, it's all
that's
about
been
having
it was
those lieutenants.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
and it was like a beehive kind of you know mentality, kind of working on this. We were all kind of humming at the same time, and yeah, it was a cool vibe.
Do you think that period of time between Scavengers and Scavengers Reign, that pause that you, well, not real pause, but there was like a lot of like,
Hmm.
I call it like in Hollywood, we call it hurry up and wait.
Hmm.
It's like you
Yeah.
go to the meeting, like, yeah, we're doing this. And like 6 months later, it's like, are we doing this? No, no, you have to be tomorrow. Like, you have to be on the meeting tomorrow. You go on the meeting, it's like,
Oh my
yeah, we'll
god.
maybe do it in a week. Um,
Yeah.
do you think that period of time helped to build like enough? I don't know if experience is the right word. Um, I think of it from
Definitely.
I think of it from a perspective of like, you know, I just gonna like self insert for a second. Like I'm thinking where I am right now and what I'm able to do in animation and directing, building my own
Yeah.
team and dealing with talent. And if I had to place myself in the same position, let's say even just 3 years ago, it would
Hmm.
almost feel like a impossible task, if you know what I mean. It's
Hmm.
like there's certain things project per project you start to pick up, uh,
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
and you
I
learn.
mean, yeah, I talk about this sometimes where there were projects that I made in my 20s, in my early 20s that I was so gung ho about it becoming a TV show. And in hindsight, I'm like so happy that it did not, because I do think that it would have been creatively stifling. I think that me not getting sort of the opportunities early on in my life sort of allowed like opened doors and allowed me to kind of grow in certain ways that I don't think I would have. If I had a super successful show in my early 20s, I think I would have just been stuck in that and not, there'd be no reason to kind of grow. I like that that it was a lot of hurdles and a lot of things that kind of like held me back. At least to now, you know, I'm about to be 38 years old, and I feel mentally good, and I feel like I know myself, and I, you know, I know what I want, and I don't know, it's just feeling a lot more kind of like level-headed, and grounded, I think, and I think that just really helps. Just thinking about that as an artist and making things is, it's just it feels a lot clearer, and I think there's a moment too, for me at least, it felt like um, I used to always regret the things that I make. Like
Mm.
I'll make it and then I just want to move on because I don't want to think about it, and it's embarrassing coming back to that. But like it's happening less and less, I'll say. And
Right.
I am proud of like something like Scavengers. I'm very proud of it. I'm sure there are some things that I wish I could have fixed and whatever, but like overall, I'm proud of the show. I think it turned out it turned out well. Um, so you know that there's a lot of that kind of stuff I think about.
Was there anything in Wait, hold on. I don't think I asked you that. I'm very curious. It's one of like my top priorities to ask you actually. um, how long was the production on on the show? Like,
Well, the pilot was about I don't know, a little less than a year, but then the rest of the 11 episodes was about 1.5 years.
okay, that's crazy.
It was crazy. It was crazy. I mean, it was just stacked. Um, you know, it's an unbelievable amount of work in such a short period, and
Does
you
that
are
include writing, like from scratch, or did you guys have some
I
resemblance of
think
what those episodes gonna look like before that?
it I think with writing it was probably another like extra 3 months. So
Okay, wow. All right.
yeah, I mean it's crazy. You just have no time to pause. You just have to
No, definitely
make
not.
like
Definitely not.
every. I mean, it's just a thing. I mean, and I think that's kind of the case with a lot of TV shows. It's just a matter of how much extra that the creator wants to give or whatever. But
Right.
I was just drained. I was just absolutely drained at the end of every day. I like mashed potato brains. You know, I couldn't hold a conversation. I was so dead. But yeah, it was intense.
Do you think that was like the hardest thing you've ever done? Like,
Um, yeah, I mean, you know, also that was it's definitely yes and no. I guess it's like I was because I was doing that. I was also in the writer's room for Common Side Effects, and I was also making 100 Pepe animations, and I had to work on those animations with. And obviously, I was working with artists, and they were, but working with Matt Fury and kind of doing those while you know it was kind of it was just a lot.
they were excellent.
Okay.
uh,
Yeah, it was just an insane just a lot. But um, you know, I'm working on a lot of projects right now, and I think I'm managing my time pretty well. I'm not. It's a lot, but I can manage it, and it's not stressful. Like it's like a healthy stress, you know. It's not-
yeah, yeah. I think sometimes you need like we need a little bit of a pressure and discomfort to get the best out of ourselves. I truly believe
Yeah,
that, you know.
yeah,
Um, but I'm
totally.
very curious because everyone is so different, and you know, I look back, there were certain projects that I consider like were life changing in terms of like how I think about life because of those, you know.
Totally.
Um, um, but yeah, that's interesting. Like, yeah, the approach to be like more level headed.
Yeah.
Um, but it still
Yeah.
sounds very crazy to me. I was a year and a half.
Yeah.
that
Well,
sounds very insane.
yeah, but I would also say that like I my mind works, I think, where it's like I'm excited about a thing, and then when I'm kind of uh, a little over it, I can hop onto another thing very quickly, and then you get tired of that and you can jump back. And so I think I've just gotten used to, for been 20 years now or something, been doing that. So I can jump from just like five things or whatever, and every time I kind of jump to the next one, it's exciting, it's new,
Right.
it feels fresh, um, as opposed to just kind of like one thing and that's it and that's my focus. I feel like I'd go a little nuts if I had to do that. Um, so and we I've got a studio now that called Green Street, and we're doing a lot of really cool projects here, and so it gives me that opportunity to sort of just jump around.
That's
So
cool.
yeah.
That's cool. I'm super excited to see what's gonna be next,
Yeah.
because I immediately became a fan. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Thank you.
very excited. Big congrats on Scavengers again. I mean,
Thank you.
it's a special show for sure.
Thank you so
Like
much.
I've
Appreciate it.
watched your episode with Ash, and Ash was praising you like from start to
That's so
finish with
sweet.
no
That's
end.
so
And
sweet. Yeah. What a
yeah,
sweet
he's like
guy.
the sweetest guy too.
Yeah.
I like I want to say that there's the same level of fandom, let's say,
Yeah.
attached from my end, but maybe I'm just a little less expressive, let's say. Um,
Sure.
but
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I definitely I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was one of those where like I really wanted to binge to know what's next, but I also,
Yeah.
you know what it reminds me of? It's like I started reading Meditations from Marcus Aurelius,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love that book.
and I made myself to read it in a way where I read it to a point where there's a passage that I highlight and then I
Mhm.
stop. I let it like sink in and like
That's
really
great. Yeah.
marinate and get enough kind of processing time to truly understand what this passage means and
Love
how it's
that.
like affects me personally. And
Love that.
watching Scavengers was exactly that for me. I was like, let's watch this
That's
episode,
great.
and I, as much as I want to know what happens next, it's like, no, I need to like soak it in, take it easy,
Yeah.
go
That's
back to
how
the time where you would watch it an episode a week, you know?
I love that. The idea of like uh sort of ingesting entertainment that way, is so much nicer. I mean, it's kind of how we watch movies. It's like it's a treat.
Right.
I try to be careful about that kind of thing of just how much am I just uh how much content am I taking in, and like it's just if it's just at a certain point where it's so overly saturated and I don't remember anything. I just don't. I'd rather be
Yeah.
excited about a show or excited about a movie and really like think about it and kind of like what you're saying, like mull over it, um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's just the best
meditate on
way,
it.
I think.
Yeah,
Just get fully immersed experience out of it at last.
definitely,
I've been
absolutely.
recommending left and right, like you gotta watch Scavengers. Like pretty much all my friends
Thank
like
you.
are fucking hating me now. Just like how much I say, like you gotta watch Scavengers, like on the repeat, like a broken tape. So yeah, super excited. I mean, I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're kind of like around the time where we're supposed to wrap it up. Really appreciate you coming on
Yeah,
to chat
definitely.
for
Thanks for
just for a
having me.
bit. And yeah, I'm super excited. What's
Thank you,
next?
and thanks for spreading the gospel. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I'm gonna preach until people hate me. Um, is there anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say TBD on season two,
Okay,
but hopefully TBD. Not sure
I'm
yet.
gonna cross my fingers. It's better happen. But we know how it is in Hollywood.
Yeah, I know.
I've been on both ends working as an artist with like different shows and now like directing and
Yeah,
it's just like both have their benefits. But
totally, absolutely.
yeah, super excited though. TBD. All right, cool. I'll take that. Thank you, Joe.
Cool. Thank you so much. All right.
Yeah,
Have a good one, Michelle.
take
See
care.
ya. Bye.
Bye.